The dust of the Arizona Territory settles on everything, but it never buries the truth. For a woman widowed at dawn, the truth is a dangerous thing. This isn't a story about grief. It's about the lies that bind us and the violence that sets us free. It's about a woman who buried one man in the morning only to find his ghost wearing his coat and a stranger's face sitting at her table by nightfall. What secrets was her husband hiding beneath the floorboards of their life, and how much blood must be spilled before the sun sets on his final debt? The day Josiah Hayes died, the sun rose with a bitter, bloody reluctance. It bled across the eastern peaks of the Dragoon Mountains, staining the vast, indifferent sky in hues of bruised purple and angry orange. For Adelaide Hayes, the colors felt like a mockery. She had been digging since the first hint of grey light had softened the edges of the night. The earth on their small homestead was a cruel thing, a mix of dry, cracked clay and stone that fought the shovel with every thrust. Blisters had bloomed and broken on her palms, the sting of sweat and grit, a constant nagging pain. She ignored it. It was a small penance. Josiah lay wrapped in their best quilt, the one his mother had made its intricate patchwork of blues and greens, now sullied with the dirt of his own land. He was still, finally. The frantic, rasping breaths of the night before had ceased, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight in the small cabin. Cholera, the traveling doctor from Tucson, had guessed, a week ago, shrugging his shoulders with the weary apathy of a man who'd seen too much of it. A bad batch of water, perhaps. A cruel twist of fate. Adelaide knew better. Fate had a face and a name, and it had come calling 2 nights ago. She paused, leaning on the shovel handle, her breath pluming in the chill morning air. The grave was nearly deep enough. 6 feet, he'd always said. A man deserves a full 6 feet to keep the coyotes from his bones. Her arms screamed with the effort, her back a tight knot of agony. But she would give him this. It was the last thing she could do for him. The last kindness. The last lie. She looked toward the small, sturdy cabin they had built with their own hands. It looked forlorn, a lonely sentinel in the vast, unforgiving landscape. Smoke curled from its stone chimney, a ghostly white finger pointing to the heavens. Inside, the water for her coffee was boiling. Life disgustingly went on. With a final desperate burst of energy, she deepened the hole, squaring the corners as best she could. It would have to do. Dragging Josiah was the hardest part. He wasn't a large man, but in death he had become an anchor, a dead weight of memory and regret. She pulled the shrouded body onto a spare plank of wood, a makeshift sled, and hauled him across the yard to the edge of his final resting place. The quilt snagged on a stubborn root, and for a heart-stopping moment, the fabric pulled away from his face. She flinched, her stomach churning. His skin, pale and waxy in the dawn light, was pulled taut over his cheekbones. His eyes were closed, his mouth slightly agape, as if to utter one last protest. But it was the mark on his neck that held her gaze. A dark, ugly bruise, almost purple-black, blooming just below his jawline. Not the work of a fever. That was the work of a man's hands. Strong hands. Her own hand flew to her throat, a phantom pressure making her gasp. She quickly pulled the quilt back into place, her movements jerky and panicked. No one could see that. No one could ever know. As she adjusted the fabric, her fingers brushed against the inside pocket of his worn denim jacket. A small, hard object. Frowning, she reached inside. It wasn't his familiar pocket knife or the smooth worry stone he always carried. This was something else. She pulled it out and held it in her blistered palm. It was a small, crudely carved disc of dark wood, no bigger than a silver dollar. An intricate symbol was etched into its surface, a serpent coiled around a hangman's noose. It was unfamiliar, sinister. It felt wrong in her hand, like a shard of a life she knew nothing about. Where had this come from? Josiah wasn't a man for trinkets. He was a simple farmer, a man of the earth. Wasn't he? A cold dread, sharper than the morning air, snaked its way up her spine. This token was a key, she knew it instinctively, a key to a door she had never known existed. A door he had kept locked from her for the 5 years of their marriage. With a shudder, she shoved the token into the pocket of her work dress and pushed his body into the grave. It landed with a soft, final thud. The sound echoed in the silence, a period at the end of a long, convoluted sentence. She began to shovel the earth back in. Each spadeful felt like a betrayal, burying not just her husband, but the questions that now screamed in her mind. Who was the man who had visited 2 nights ago, his face hidden by the brim of his hat? His voice a low rumble in the darkness. What had they argued about in hushed, vicious tones while she pretended to be asleep? And who was the man she had just buried? By the time the sun had fully crested the mountains, the grave was filled, a raw red-brown scar on the land. She didn't have the strength to roll a stone over it. Not yet. She stood for a long moment, the shovel held loosely in her hand, a lone figure in a vast, empty world. She did not cry. Her tears had dried up in the night, evaporated by the heat of her fear and the coldness of her resolve. She had buried her husband at dawn. She was a widow. She was alone. She was, she thought, with a terrifying clarity, in mortal danger. Turning her back on the grave, she walked toward the cabin, her mind a maelstrom of fear and confusion. The wooden token in her pocket felt as heavy as a tombstone. She needed coffee. She needed to think. She needed to understand the life of the man she'd married before his past came back to bury her too. The sun climbed higher, relentless and unforgiving. The heat began to bake the earth, and the lonely homestead shimmered in the growing light. The day was just beginning. The day bled away into a long, tense afternoon. Adelaide scrubbed the cabin floor with a furious energy, trying to scour away the lingering scent of sickness and death. She cleaned Josiah's razor, packed his few clothes into a small wooden chest, and stacked his books neatly on the shelf. With each mundane task, she tried to reassert control over a world that had tilted violently on its axis. But the silence in the cabin was a living thing. It buzzed with unspoken words, with the echoes of last night's argument, with the chilling presence of the wooden token that now lay hidden beneath a loose floorboard in her bedroom. She kept Josiah's old shotgun propped by the door, loaded and ready. She peered out the window 100 times, scanning the horizon, her heart lurching at the sight of a dust devil or a distant tumbleweed. Who was she looking for? The man from the other night. The sheriff. She didn't know which was worse. When Sheriff Brody finally did arrive late in the afternoon, his buggy kicking up a cloud of fine red dust, Adelaide felt a wave of something that was not quite relief. Brody was a good man, but he was a lawman, and the law had no place in the secret she was now keeping. "Adelaide," he said, his voice gruff but kind, as he removed his hat, revealing a fringe of sweat, damp grey hair. "Martha from the general store sent her boy over. Said she saw you. Digging. I'm sorry to hear about Josiah." Martha, the town's ever-watchful eye. Of course. It was the cholera sheriff, Adelaide said, her voice carefully steady. She held the door open but did not invite him in. It took him fast. Brodie's eyes, the color of faded denim, scanned her face, then glanced past her into the unnaturally clean cabin. He was a man who noticed things. Fast is a mercy, I suppose. Do you need help with arrangements? I can send my deputy Finn to help you with a proper marker. Thank you, Sheriff, but I've managed, she said, her grip tightening on the doorframe. I just want to be left alone for a while. Of course, he said, though he didn't look convinced. His gaze lingered for a moment on the shotgun. You be careful out here, Adelaide. A woman alone. He let the sentence hang in the air, a testament to all the dangers the territory held. I can take care of myself, she replied, her tone sharper than she intended. He nodded slowly, put his hat back on, and turned to leave. If you need anything at all, you send for me. She watched him go, her body rigid with tension. The interview had been a rehearsal, a test. She wasn't sure if she had passed. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in the same violent colors as the dawn, an exhausted peace began to settle over her. Perhaps she had been wrong. Perhaps the visitor had been a random drifter, his argument with Josiah a meaningless squabble. Perhaps the token was just a piece of wood. Perhaps the bruise was just a shadow. She was sitting at the small kitchen table, staring into a cup of cold coffee when she heard it. The slow, rhythmic clopping of a horse, steady and unhurried. It wasn't Brodie's buggy. This was a single rider. Her blood ran cold. She snatched the shotgun, her hands trembling, and moved to the window, peering cautiously around the edge of the curtain. A lone figure was approaching, silhouetted against the fiery sundown. He rode a rangy bay horse that looked as tired as the day was old. But it wasn't the man or the horse that made her heart slam against her ribs. It was the coat. He was wearing Josiah's coat. It was unmistakable. A heavy sheepskin-lined coat, its tan canvas faded by the sun and darkened at the shoulders from years of rain. One of the leather buttons was missing, and there was a small L-shaped tear near the left pocket that she had mended herself just last winter. It was as much a part of Josiah as his beard or his calloused hands, and a stranger was wearing it. He rode directly into the yard, as if he belonged there, dismounting with a fluid grace that spoke of a life spent in the saddle. He was tall and lean, moving with a predator's economy of motion. He looped the reins around the hitching post and turned toward the cabin. For a moment, his face was illuminated by the dying light. He was younger than Josiah, perhaps 30. His face was all sharp angles and hard planes, shadowed by a dark stubble. A long scar, white and puckered, cut a path from his left temple to the corner of his mouth, giving him a permanent, cynical smirk. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were dark, intelligent, and utterly devoid of warmth. They swept over the cabin, the yard, and the fresh grave with a cool, appraising glance. Adelaide's breath hitched. This was not the man from the other night. This was someone new, someone far more dangerous. She leveled the shotgun, the heavy barrels resting on the windowsill. Her mind screamed at her to shoot, to end this before it began. But her finger froze on the trigger. Who was he? How did he get at Josiah's coat? He walked to the door, his steps confident and measured. He didn't knock. He simply stopped waiting, as if he knew she was watching him. The silence stretched thick and suffocating. "Mom." His voice came a low, calm baritone that cut through the evening air with unnerving clarity. It wasn't a question or a greeting. It was a statement. "I know you're in there. I'm looking for Josiah Hayes." Adelaide's throat was so dry she couldn't speak. She pressed herself against the wall, the shotgun feeling flimsy and useless in her hands. "He and I have some unfinished business," the stranger continued, his voice maddeningly patient. "I'm not leaving until I find him." Summoning every ounce of courage she possessed, Adelaide called out, her voice a raw, wavering thing. "Josiah Hayes is dead." There was another long pause. She could hear the wind whispering around the corners of the cabin, the tired sigh of the stranger's horse. "I know," the man said, and the two words sent a fresh wave of terror through her. "I can see the grave from here. But that doesn't change the fact that he owes me something." He took a step closer to the door. "And I aim to collect. Now are you going to open this door, or am I—" The sun slipped below the horizon, plunging the yard into a deep twilight. The stranger in her husband's coat was a dark, menacing shape against the fading light. He had come home, and Adelaide knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that the dying had only just begun. The door did not open, nor did he force it. The stranger, it seemed, was a man of immense unnerving patience. He simply sat on the porch step, the sheepskin collar of Josiah's coat turned up against the night's chill, and waited. The darkness deepened, absolute and star-dusted. Inside, Adelaide sat in a hard-backed chair, the shotgun laid across her lap, her eyes fixed on the door. Every creak of the cabin's wood, every skittering sound from outside sent a jolt through her nervous system. This was a siege of the mind. He was not breaking down her door. He was breaking down her resolve. She was alone, exhausted, and terrified. He was calm, resolute, and on the other side of a thin plank of wood. Time was on his side. An hour passed, then 2. The moon rose, casting long, skeletal shadows across the yard. The man hadn't moved. Finally, a new sound reached her, the gentle clinking of metal and the rasp of a flint. A moment later, the rich, aromatic scent of coffee drifted under the door. He had made a small fire in the yard and was brewing a pot. The sheer audacity of it, the domesticity of the act in the face of such menace, was disorienting. "Figure you could use some," he called out, his voice still infuriatingly calm. "No sense in both of us sitting up all night with cold bellies." Adelaide's own stomach growled in betrayal. She hadn't eaten since morning. The coffee, a luxury she carefully rationed, was a temptation she could barely resist. It was a calculated move, a small crack in her fortress of fear. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice stronger this time. "I told you. Something Josiah owes me," he replied. "A debt. Now last I checked property, and debts fall to the surviving spouse. That makes this your problem now, ma'am. I have nothing." She lied, her hand instinctively touching the pocket where the wooden token had been. "This homestead is all we had, and it's mortgaged to the hilt." A dry, humorless chuckle came from outside. "I'm not talking about money, Mrs. Hayes. Not the kind you keep in a bank anyway." Her mind reeled. What was he talking about? What kind of debt? Her thoughts flashed back to Josiah in his last few months. He had grown distant, his moods dark and volatile. There had been hushed arguments, not just with the stranger 2 nights ago, but between them. "We need money, Josiah." She'd hissed at him one night, the stack of unpaid bills a silent accuser on the table between them. "The drought has taken half the crop. We won't make it through the winter." "I'll handle it." He'd snapped his eyes, avoiding hers. He'd taken to disappearing for days at a time, claiming he was looking for work at the silver mine in Tombstone. He always came back empty-handed, but with his clothes smelling of cheap whiskey and his pockets full of dust. How she had pressed. How will you handle it? He had slammed his hand on the table, making her jump. Just leave it be, woman. It's men's business. Now sitting in the dark, his words echoed with a sinister new meaning. What men's business had her husband been involved in? The stranger on her porch seemed to know. His name was Caleb, the man said suddenly as if reading her thoughts. The man you're thinking about. The one who came calling a couple of nights back. Adelaide froze. He knew. How could he possibly know? My name is Brand, the stranger continued, his voice dropping lower, more intimate. Caleb Brand. Josiah and I. We were associates. Old associates. He made a promise. I'm here to make sure it was kept. This was too much. Her carefully constructed walls were crumbling. She was out of her depth, drowning in a sea of secrets. She had to know more. She had to see his face, to look in his eyes and try to find the truth. With trembling hands she stood and walked to the door. She slid the heavy bolt back. The sound was deafening in the silence. She opened the door a crack, the shotgun still held tight against her body. Caleb Brand was crouched by his small fire, pouring coffee into a tin cup. He looked up as the door opened, his dark eyes locking onto hers. There was no surprise in them, only a grim sort of satisfaction. The firelight danced across the scar on his face, making it writhe like a living thing. That's better, he said softly. He stood up, grabbing the coffee pot and the second cup he had set out. He walked slowly toward her, his hands in plain sight. He wasn't holding a weapon. His weapon was the knowledge he held the past he shared with her husband. He stopped a few feet from the door. Adelaide, is it? She nodded, unable to speak. Well, Adelaide, he said, extending the cup of coffee to her. It seems you and I have a great deal to talk about. She hesitated for a heart-stopping moment, her gaze flicking from the coffee to his face, then to the coat he wore. Josiah's coat. It was like seeing a ghost. Finally, with a deep, shuddering breath, she lowered the shotgun and took the cup. As her fingers brushed against his, she felt a jolt, a spark of connection to this dangerous man, who held the key to her husband's secret life. He stepped across her threshold, and the cabin which had felt so empty all day was suddenly claustrophobic, charged with a terrifying new energy. The door swung shut behind him, and Adelaide Hayes was no longer alone. She was trapped. The conversation that followed was a careful, dangerous dance. They sat at the table, the shotgun now resting on her lap, its muzzle pointed vaguely in his direction. Caleb Brand sipped his coffee, his eyes constantly moving, taking in every detail of the small cabin. The coat, Adelaide said, her voice barely a whisper. How did you get it? Found a man selling it in a saloon in Benson. Caleb answered easily. Drunkard who claimed he won it in a poker game. I recognized it right away. Josiah was always proud of this coat. He ran a hand over the sleeve. Cost him a month's wages, he told me. Adelaide's blood ran cold. The man from 2 nights ago, the one Caleb claimed to know, must have taken it from Josiah's body and lost it in a card game. This wasn't just a stranger. This was a man tied directly to her husband's death. Who are you? She asked again, more forcefully this time. What kind of associates were you? Caleb gave her a long, measuring look. The kind that depends on trust, he said slowly. The kind where a man's word is all he has. Josiah broke that trust. He took something that wasn't his to take alone. Something valuable. I told you there's nothing here. It's here, Caleb insisted, his voice hardening. He wouldn't have run to a place like this, buried himself in dirt and debt, unless he was hiding something. He was never the farming type. He hated the sun, hated the quiet. He was a man made for noise and shadows. Everything he said chipped away at the image of the man she thought she'd married. Josiah, who complained about the summer heat. Josiah, who always seemed restless in the evenings, pacing the small cabin like a caged animal. Josiah, who had secrets. Suddenly, a loud banging at the door made them both jump. Adelaide's heart leaped into her throat. "Mrs. Hayes, Adelaide," a familiar voice called out. "Deputy Finn." "Sheriff Brody sent me to check on you. He was worried." Caleb's eyes locked with hers. A silent, urgent message passed between them. In that split second, Adelaide made a choice. She didn't know who or what Caleb Brand was, but she knew instinctively that letting the law into this tangled mess would be a fatal mistake. The secret of the bruise on Josiah's neck was hers alone. "Just a moment, Deputy," she called out, her voice high and strained. She looked at Caleb, her eyes wide with panic. He moved with astonishing speed. He grabbed the shotgun from her lap, slid it under the bed, and kicked the small wooden chest with Josiah's clothes against the wall. He turned to her, his face inches from hers, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "I'm your cousin, from back east. Came to help you with the funeral." His eyes bore into hers, demanding compliance. "Do you understand?" She could only nod, her mind reeling. She opened the door to a fresh-faced Deputy Finn, his brow furrowed with concern. "Ma'am, are you all right?" I heard voices. "I'm fine, Deputy," Adelaide said, forcing a weak smile. My cousin just arrived." "Caleb." He came as soon as he heard about Josiah. Caleb stepped forward, extending a hand to the bewildered deputy. He had transformed. The menace was gone, replaced by a mask of somber concern. He looked every bit the grieving relative. "Caleb Brand," he said, his voice laced with false sadness. "Thank you for checking on my cousin, Deputy. It's been a terrible shock for her." Deputy Finn, young and earnest, shook his hand, his suspicion melting away. "Of course. Well, that's a relief. The sheriff was worried. I'll let him know you're not alone, Mrs. Hayes." "Thank you, Finn," Adelaide said, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. As the deputy tipped his hat and walked back to his horse, Adelaide closed the door and leaned against it, her legs feeling like water. She turned to face Caleb, who was watching her with a new, unreadable expression. The mask was gone. The predator was back. "You're a good liar, Adelaide," he said, a slow, dangerous smile touching his lips. "Josiah was too." The air in the cabin crackled with tension. They were allies now, bound by a shared deception. But Adelaide knew this alliance was as fragile as a pane of glass and just as sharp. She had lied to the law to protect a secret she didn't even understand for a man who was her captor. The night was far from over. The departure of Deputy Finn left a new kind of silence in the cabin. It was heavier laced with the cloying weight of their shared conspiracy. Adelaide and Caleb were no longer just a widow and an intruder. They were accomplices. The lie she had told had tethered her to him, and the flimsy barrier of the shotgun was gone. She was now truly at his mercy. He seemed to sense the shift in power. He moved about the small space with more confidence, pouring himself another cup of coffee as if he lived there. He picked up one of Josiah's books, a worn copy of Leaves of Grass, and flipped through the pages, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He always had his nose in a book, Caleb murmured more to himself than to her. Said it made him feel like a gentleman. The comment was so casual, so strangely intimate, it unnerved Adelaide more than any threat. This man knew a version of her husband she had never been allowed to see. The Josiah she knew was a quiet man who read the Farmer's Almanac and the Bible. Who was this other Josiah, the one who worried about being a gentleman? What was it? Adelaide asked, her voice low. What did he take? Caleb placed the book back on the shelf, his gaze sweeping the room again, but this time with a specific intensity. He wasn't just looking, he was searching. The culmination of a lot of hard work, he said. The retirement fund, you might say, from our association. And what association was that? He turned to face her, his cynical smirk back in place. We were in the import-export business. We imported other people's assets and exported them to places they couldn't be found. The meaning was clear. Robbers. Thieves. Her husband, the simple homesteader, was a thief. The word hung in the air, ugly and sharp. It explained so much: the secret trips, the sudden tempers, the haunted look that was sometimes in his eyes. I don't believe you, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Don't you? Caleb challenged. Think about it, Adelaide. A man like Josiah with his tastes. Did this place ever seem like enough for him? Did he ever seem settled? She had no answer. He was right. Josiah had always seemed like he was waiting for something, like their life was a temporary stop on the way to somewhere better. She had assumed he was ambitious. She had never considered he was a fugitive. While Caleb continued his visual sweep of the room, an idea began to form in Adelaide's mind. If Josiah was hiding something valuable, he would have kept a record. He was a meticulous man, a man of ledgers and lists. He tracked every seed, every penny, every drop of rain. He would have tracked this too. She thought of the small locked chest where he kept his personal papers. He had always been fiercely protective of it, claiming it held deeds and family letters. She had never had a reason to look inside. Now she had every reason in the world. It's getting late, she said, trying to keep her voice even. I'm going to turn in. It was a dismissal, an attempt to reclaim some small piece of her home. Caleb raised an eyebrow but didn't protest. I'll take the floor, he said, gesturing with his coffee cup. Don't worry, I don't bite, unless I'm provoked. Adelaide retreated to her small bedroom, her heart pounding. She didn't dare light a lamp. She waited, listening to the sounds from the main room, the clink of his cup, the soft creak of the floorboards as he moved, and finally the sigh of his body, settling onto the rug near the hearth. She waited for what felt like an eternity, until his breathing deepened into the slow, rhythmic pattern of sleep. Moving with the silence of a shadow, she slid the wooden chest out from under her bed. The lock was simple, but she had no key. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on a hairpin resting on her dresser. With trembling fingers, she picked it and returned to the chest. She had seen this done in a penny dreadful once. She inserted the pin into the lock, her hands clumsy, her nerves shot. She jiggled it, twisted it, scraped it against the tumblers, sweat beading on her forehead. For a moment she thought it was hopeless. Then with a faint click, the lock sprang open. She held her breath, listening. Caleb didn't stir. Slowly she lifted the lid. Inside were the expected documents, the deed to the homestead. Her marriage certificate, a few faded letters from Josiah's estranged sister. But underneath them, tucked into a false bottom she had never known, there was a small leather-bound ledger. Her fingers trembled as she lifted it out. This was it. This had to be it. Using the faint moonlight filtering through the small window, she opened the first page. It wasn't farm accounts. It was a list of names, towns, and numbers. Black Creek Station, Wells Fargo, $15,000. Durango Payroll, Silverton Mine, $22,000. Union Pacific, Cheyenne Line, $35,000. It was a litany of crimes, a confession written in neat, precise script, her husband's script. The total at the bottom of the final page made her gasp. Over $70,000, a king's ransom, enough to disappear and start a dozen new lives. Her husband hadn't been a simple farmer. He had been part of a gang that had terrorized the territories for years, and then it seemed he had stolen from his own. She had to show Caleb. This was the proof he needed. This was her only leverage. Clutching the ledger to her chest, she rose and crept back into the main room. Caleb was not asleep. He was sitting up, silhouetted by the dying embers in the fireplace, watching her. He had been waiting. "Find what you were looking for?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. Adelaide stopped frozen in the middle of the room. The ledger suddenly felt like a lead weight in her hands. She had walked right into his trap. "I think so," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She held it out to him. "Is this it? Is this the debt you came to collect?" He didn't take it from her. He just stared at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "That's the accounting," he said. "But it's not the payment. That's just paper, Adelaide. I'm here for the gold." He rose to his feet and slowly walked toward her. Josiah, or as we knew him, Gentleman Jack, was the planner, the brains. He figured the routes, the schedules, the weak points. I was the muscle. So was another man. A man named Elias Thorne. At the mention of the new name, a chill went through Adelaide. "Thorne is not a patient man like me," Caleb continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He's not a reasonable man. After the Union Pacific job, Jack was supposed to meet us with the score. He never showed up. Disappeared off the face of the earth. Took everything. I've been looking for him for 2 years. Thorne has been too." He was standing right in front of her now, so close she could feel the warmth radiating from him. The man who came here 2 nights ago, the one who took Josiah's coat. That wasn't Thorne. That was a hired tracker Thorne sent looking for me. The tracker must have found his way to Josiah first. And when Josiah wouldn't talk, he let the implication hang in the air. The bruise on Josiah's neck, the quick, violent death. It wasn't cholera. It was murder. And the killer wasn't Caleb. "Thorne is the one who killed your husband, Adelaide," Caleb said, his voice soft but laced with iron. "And he knows Jack had a wife. He knows about this homestead. The tracker would have reported back before he got himself drunk and lost that coat. Thorne is coming here, and when he arrives, he's not going to knock politely and ask for a cup of coffee. He will burn this place to the ground to find what he's looking for, and he will kill anyone who gets in his way." The ledger slipped from her numb fingers and fell to the floor with a soft thud. The world had tilted again, more violently this time. She wasn't just harboring a thief. She was standing in the crosshairs of a murderer. "The gold," she whispered, her mind racing. "Where is it? That's what you and I are going to find out," Caleb said, his eyes boring into hers. "And we're going to find it before sunrise, because if we don't, neither of us will live to see another one." The revelation shattered the last vestiges of the night's fragile peace. The name Elias Thorne was a lit match dropped into a puddle of kerosene. The cabin was no longer a sanctuary, however tense. It was a tomb waiting to be sealed. "We have to go," Adelaide said, her voice frantic. "We have to ride for Sheriff Brody now," And tell him what? Caleb countered, his tone sharp and dismissive. He picked up the fallen ledger, his expression grim. That your dead husband was a master thief, that you've been harboring his partner, a wanted man, while lying to a deputy that a whole gang of killers is on its way to tear this place apart for a fortune in stolen gold. Brody's a good man, but he's out of his depth. He'll get himself and his boy, Finn, killed. No, we're not running. We're staying. That's insane, she cried, gesturing wildly around the small cabin. We're trapped here. He'll kill us all. He'll kill us if we run too. Caleb set his voice a low, cold stream of logic that cut through her panic. Thorn will hunt us to the ends of the earth. Our only chance is here, on our terms. Josiah, for all his faults, picked this spot for a reason. It's isolated, good sightlines, defensible. He looked at her, his dark eyes intense. You know this land better than anyone, Adelaide. You know its secrets. I know Thorn. Together we might stand a chance. She stared at him, her mind a whirlwind of terror and disbelief. An alliance. An unholy alliance between a grieving widow and a hardened outlaw against a monster of her husband's making. It was madness. It was also, she realized with a sinking heart, their only hope. The search began with a desperate, frantic energy. They tore the cabin apart. Caleb, with the focused eye of a professional, tapped walls, looking for hollow spaces. He checked the chimney, the ceiling beams, the foundation stones. Adelaide, her mind racing, searched through Josiah's things with a new perspective. Every loose floorboard, every knick-knack, every book was a potential clue. Where would he hide it? She thought, her hands pulling at the seams of Josiah's spare mattress. Not in the cabin. Too obvious. Too small. The first place anyone would look. Caleb seemed to reach the same conclusion. It's not in here, he said, kicking a floorboard back into place with frustration. Jack was smarter than that. He liked misdirection. Grand gestures. Adelaide's eyes drifted to the window toward the dark scar on the land that was her husband's grave. A grand gesture. The thought hit her with the force of a physical blow. The grave, she breathed. Caleb turned to her, his eyes widening as he understood. Of course, he whispered, a grim smile touching his lips. The one place no one would dare to look, hiding his treasure under the marker of his own death. The man always did love poetry. Before they could act, a new sound cut through the night, the distant but distinct sound of multiple horses moving fast. They're here, Caleb said, his body going rigid. He moved to the window, peering into the darkness. 4 of them. Panic, cold and sharp, seized Adelaide. It's too late. It's never too late, Caleb snapped. He grabbed the shotgun from under the bed and tossed it to her. You know how to use this? Josiah taught me. She answered, the weight of the weapon a terrifying comfort in her hands. Good. Don't shoot until you can see their faces. Bar the door. I'll take the back window. He pulled his own pistol, a Colt Peacemaker, from a holster she hadn't realized he was wearing under the coat. The transformation was complete. The grieving cousin was gone. In his place was a hardened killer ready for a fight. Adelaide slammed the heavy bar across the door, her heart hammering. She blew out the single lamp, plunging the cabin into near-total darkness, illuminated only by the faint dying glow of the embers. She could hear the riders circling the homestead, their horses' hooves trampling the dry earth. A voice called out, coarse and mocking. Brand, I know you're in there. I can smell you from here. Send out the girl and the gold. and I might let you walk away." "That's Thorn," Caleb whispered from across the room. "Don't listen to him. He's a liar." Adelaide moved to the front window, peering through a small crack. In the pale moonlight, she could see them. 4 menacing figures on horseback rifles, held ready. One was larger than the others, sitting on his horse with an air of absolute authority. Elias Thorn. Suddenly, a 5th horse appeared riding hard from the direction of the town. It was Deputy Finn. "Oh no," Adelaide gasped. Brodie must have remained uneasy and sent his deputy back for one last check. The boy was riding into a death trap. "What is it?" Caleb demanded. "The deputy, he's coming back." Before Caleb could respond, Thorn raised his rifle. "Looks like the law's arrived," he bellowed with a laugh. A single shot cracked through the night air. Deputy Finn cried out and tumbled from his saddle, a dark shape lying motionless on the ground. A wave of fury, hot and pure, washed over Adelaide, momentarily eclipsing her fear. They had shot him down in cold blood. "The bastard!" she snarled, leveling the shotgun. The siege began in earnest. Gunshots erupted from all sides, splintering the wooden walls of the cabin. Glass from the windows shattered, spraying across the floor. Adelaide and Caleb dropped to their bellies, crawling to their positions. "They're trying to pin us down!" Caleb yelled over the din. "Make us waste ammunition!" The next hour was a blur of noise, smoke, and terror. They returned fire, sparingly making every shot count. Adelaide, to her own astonishment, found a strange, cold calm settling over her. The woman who had wept over broken preserves now sighted down a shotgun barrel, firing at shadows that meant to kill her. She was fighting for her home, for the wounded boy outside, for the future she refused to let these men steal from her. Caleb was a whirlwind of deadly efficiency. He moved between the back window and the side wall, firing his Colt with a steady hand. His voice a constant stream of instruction and encouragement. "Watch the left flank. They're trying to get to the woodpile for cover. Adelaide, reload." They worked together seamlessly. 2 desperate souls bound by circumstance. In the crucible of the firefight, they were no longer widow and outlaw. They were partners. A lull in the fighting. The silence was more terrifying than the noise. "They're planning something," Caleb breathed, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. Suddenly, a flickering orange light appeared at the corner of the cabin. "Fire!" Adelaide screamed. "They're trying to burn us out. A Molotov cocktail, a bottle filled with oil and stuffed with a flaming rag, shattered against the wall. The dry, aged wood caught instantly. Flames began to lick their way up the side of the cabin, casting a hellish, dancing light into the room. The smoke was acrid and choking. "We have to move!" Caleb yelled, grabbing her arm. "The grave. It's our only chance." They scrambled to the back of the cabin. The fire was spreading fast, the roar of the flames growing louder. Caleb kicked open the back door, which had been weakened by the gunfire. He laid down covering fire, while Adelaide crawled out into the yard. The world outside was chaos. The moonlight, the firelight, the gunshots. It was a vision of hell. She scrambled toward the fresh grave, the earth soft and loose under her hands. A bullet whizzed past her ear, so close she felt its heat. One of Thorn's men was charging from the side of the house. Before she could react, a shot rang out from the doorway. The man fell. "Caleb." "Keep going," he yelled. She reached the grave and began to dig with her bare hands, clawing at the dirt like a madwoman. The earth gave way easily. Just a foot down, her fingers struck something hard and metal. A lockbox. A large iron lockbox. "I've found it," she screamed. At that moment, a massive shape loomed over her. Elias Thorne. He had used the fire as a diversion to circle around. His face, illuminated by the flames, was a mask of triumphant cruelty. He leveled his pistol at her. "Thank you for your trouble, little lady," he sneered. Adelaide stared up the barrel of the gun, her heart frozen. This was it. This was the end. But then another shape launched itself from the burning cabin. Caleb, roaring with fury, tackled Thorne, sending them both tumbling to the ground. The pistol went off the shot, going wild. The two men were a tangle of limbs, punching, gouging, fighting with primal desperation. Adelaide knew this was her only chance. She grabbed the shotgun she had dropped and staggered to her feet. Thorne was stronger. He had Caleb pinned, his huge hands closing around Caleb's throat. Caleb's face was turning purple, his eyes bulging. Adelaide didn't hesitate. She raised the shotgun, aimed for center mass, and pulled the trigger. The blast was deafening. It threw her backward, but her aim was true. Elias Thorne was lifted off his feet, a look of utter shock on his face before he crashed to the ground, lifeless. The remaining two outlaws, seeing their leader fall, panicked. They fired a few wild shots and then spurred their horses, disappearing into the darkness. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the burning cabin and the pained gasps of Caleb. Adelaide scrambled to his side. He was alive, clutching his throat. But he was alive. She looked from him to the dead man, to the burning wreckage of her home, to the shallow open grave holding her husband's stolen fortune. The sun was beginning to rise its first rays, painting the sky in the same bloody colors as the day before. But this was a new dawn. A dawn she had paid for in blood and fire. She had survived. The new dawn revealed a landscape of ruin. Her home was a blackened skeleton against the bruised sky, the air thick with the stench of gunpowder and death. Amid the devastation lay three bodies: Thorne, one of his men, and the still form of Deputy Finn. Adelaide's heart seized as she rushed to the boy's side, pressing her fingers to his neck and finding to her profound relief a faint but steady pulse. "He's alive," she called to Caleb, who was already on his feet, examining the raw bruises on his own throat. Together they moved the unconscious deputy to safety, and Adelaide quickly fashioned a crude bandage for the gunshot wound in his shoulder. He would live. With that small mercy secured, their attention turned to the open grave. They hauled the heavy iron lockbox from the dirt, and Caleb, with a grunt, smashed the rusted lock with the butt of his pistol. The contents glittered in the morning sun, a breathtaking hoard of gold coins and banknotes. It was Josiah's entire legacy of deceit in one place. 73,000, Caleb said, his voice a raw rasp. Jack was never good at division. He took it all. He ran a hand through the coins, then looked at Adelaide, his expression unreadable. "Half of it is mine, by right." "I know," she replied, feeling nothing but a strange numbness. It was blood money paid for by too many lives. In a grim, unspoken pact, they divided the fortune. Half was packed into Caleb's saddlebags. The other half returned to the lockbox for her. As Caleb cinched the heavy bags to his saddle, he paused. "What will you do now?" She looked at the smoking ruins of her life. "I don't know. There's nothing left. There's everything," he corrected, nodding to the box of gold. "You can go anywhere. San Francisco. Back east. Be anyone you want." He reached into the pocket of the coat, his coat now, and pulled out the small wooden token with the serpent and noose. He had retrieved it from the cabin before the fire. "A souvenir," he said, pressing it into her hand. "To remember the man your husband really was." She closed her fingers around the token, warmed by his skin. "And you?" A slow, genuine smile transformed his scarred face. "I hear Australia has some interesting scenery. Always wanted to see it." He swung onto his tired bay horse. "Thank you, Adelaide." "For what?" "For trying to shoot you." "For having good aim," he said simply. With a tip of his hat, a gesture of respect between equals, he turned his horse south and rode away without looking back. Adelaide stood alone, the shotgun in one hand, the token in the other. She was watching the dust settle when Sheriff Brody and a posse of 6 men rode into the yard. Brody's sharp eyes took in the entire tableau: the dead outlaws, the wounded deputy, the smoldering cabin, and the stoic woman standing guard over a box of gold. He looked at the tracks of the single horse leading south. Then his gaze settled on Adelaide. "Adelaide," he said, his voice heavy with disbelief. "What in God's name happened here?" She took a breath, the lie forming easily on her lips. It was a simpler story, a story the law could digest. Elias Thorne and his gang came looking for something they said Josiah stole. They shot Finn when he rode up. They tried to kill me. She hefted the shotgun. I got lucky. Sheriff Brody looked at her for a long, searching moment. He saw the soot on her face and the fire in her eyes. He saw the truth, and he saw the story he could tell. He made his choice. It appears Thorne and his men had a falling out over their spoils. He declared loudly to his posse, his voice carrying the weight of an official verdict. "Looks to me like they killed each other, and Mrs. Hayes was the unfortunate victim caught in the middle." He turned back to her, his eyes offering a silent pardon. As for this, he gestured to the lockbox. "It's evidence for now, but I reckon when the paperwork is filed, it'll be declared abandoned property. And I can't think of anyone with a better claim to it than the woman whose home they burned to the ground." Adelaide met his gaze and gave a single grateful nod. The sun climbed higher, illuminating the valley. She stood by the grave of the stranger. She had married a man whose death had improbably given her a new life. From the ashes of a farmer and a thief, a new woman had been born, a woman with a fortune, a shotgun, and a future that was finally her own. The sun was setting on her past, and Adelaide Hayes, for the first time, was ready for the dawn. What you've just heard is a story of survival. But more than that, it's a testament to the steel hidden within the heart of an ordinary person pushed to extraordinary limits. Adelaide Hayes wasn't born a hero. The unforgiving West forged her into one fire and blood her baptism. Her story reminds us that the people we think we know often carry secret worlds within them, and that true strength isn't the absence of fear, but acting in spite of it. If this journey into the heart of the Wild West captured your imagination, please help our stories reach more listeners. Hit that like button, share this video with a friend who loves a good drama, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you don't miss our next tale from the dusty trails of history. Thank you for listening.